I spent 42 years building my business from a leaking shed behind my first house into a company that fed dozens of families. I poured my youth into it. My strength. My marriage. My late nights. My early mornings. So when I heard my daughter's voice drifting down the hallway, smooth, confident, rehearsed, I never imagined the words she was saying could cut deeper than any loss I'd ever known. "Of course I have full authority," she told the buyers. "My father's, well, he's declining. He can't manage things the way he used to. It's time for new leadership." I stopped mid-step. The folder I was carrying slid from my hand and hit the floor, but I barely heard it. Through the half-closed office door, I could see her standing there, my daughter, smiling politely at two suited strangers, pointing at documents that belonged to me. Papers she had no right to touch. She spoke as if she owned the place, as if she had spent a single honest day working beside me. She told them the sale should be finalized quickly, before I became confused about the transition. Confused. That was the word she used. I felt the hallway tilt beneath my feet. I wanted to step forward, to confront her, to tear the lie out of the air before it settled. But then I saw her expression, steady, unbothered, prepared. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a lapse in judgment or a moment of desperation. She had planned this. She had waited for her moment. And she believed I was too old, too tired, too trusting to ever stop her. So instead of walking into that room, I stepped back. Quietly. Slowly. I let her finish her pitch. I let her talk about selling the company I built with my bare hands. I let her lie. I let her betray. I let all of it happen. Because I had already made my decision. Before I continue, if stories like this interest you, please subscribe to the channel. Now, let me tell you exactly how everything unfolded. In the hours after hearing my daughter's voice in that office, I found myself wandering through the workshop long after everyone else had gone home. The smell of sawdust, warm metal, and machine oil lingered in the air, scents that had shaped my entire adult life. I ran my hand across the old workbench, the one I built myself when I was 27. Every dent, every scratch, every faded mark told a piece of my story. My business wasn't just a building. It was the life I carved from nothing. When my wife was still alive, she used to say the workshop was the third member of our marriage. She was half right. It took so much of me, time, energy, heart, that she had to love it too to keep loving me. And she did. She believed in what I built, even when our finances shook, even when orders dried up, even when I questioned whether I'd made a mistake chasing this dream. She was the one who pushed me to hire my first employee. The one who convinced me to expand. The one who celebrated every small victory and stitched up every emotional wound after a defeat. When she passed, the business became the only piece of stability I had left. My daughter grew up inside these walls, though you wouldn't know it by the way she talks now. As a little girl, she used to run through the aisles, weaving between stacks of lumber and tools, laughing when the sawdust stuck to her clothes. She'd sit on my lap while I drafted plans, pretending she understood every line I drew. Back then, she used to call this place Daddy's Kingdom. But somewhere along the way, during her teenage years, after her mother's death, or maybe even earlier, her admiration shifted into entitlement. She liked the idea of the business, not the work behind it. She liked the image, not the responsibility. As she got older, she made it clear she had no intention of lifting a finger to help build what she eventually expected to inherit. She was ambitious, yes, but only in the way that relied on shortcuts. She lived in a world where success was something taken, not earned. I saw hints of it, small comments, dismissive tones, subtle impatience when I talked about daily challenges. But I never believed she would cross a real line. I excused too much. I forgave too quickly. I told myself she was grieving, or young, or simply finding her way. I never imagined she would try to remove me from the very legacy I created. Standing in that quiet workshop, I realized something painful. My wife had been the bridge between my daughter and me. When she died, the understanding we once had began to crumble, grain by grain, until nothing remained but expectation on her side and blind hope on mine. And now, that hope had turned into a blade she didn't hesitate to use. I thought losing my wife was the hardest thing I would ever endure. But watching my own daughter try to erase me from my life's work came dangerously close. Looking back, the warning signs weren't subtle at all. They were clear, loud, and persistent. But when you're a father, especially an aging one, you learn to ignore discomfort if it means keeping the peace. You explain things away. You call it stress, grief, youth, ambition, anything but what it really is. The first red flag came a year after my wife passed. My daughter sat across from me at the kitchen table and asked, too casually, "Dad, what exactly would happen if you couldn't run the business anymore?" I remember pausing mid-sip of coffee. "What do you mean, couldn't?" She shrugged. "Just thinking ahead. You're getting older. It's smart to plan." I dismissed it. Planning is practical. But her eyes weren't curious, they were calculating. That was the first time I felt a shift, a quiet tightening in my chest. A few months later, she asked for access to my financial statements. "I want to understand the company," she said. "In case I step in one day." But she never once showed interest in the actual work, the employees, the production floor, the customers, the systems I built over decades. She only wanted numbers. Then came the moment she asked if I had considered retiring early. I laughed, thinking she was joking. She didn't laugh with me. "You've done enough," she said. "Let someone else carry the weight." Maybe, me. But she had never learned the business. Never shadowed me. Never asked to understand a single process. She just wanted the title, the ownership, the control. The biggest red flag came when she brought me a stack of documents she claimed were routine updates. I skimmed them and found clauses granting her partial authority to make decisions in urgent circumstances. When I questioned her, she acted offended. "Dad, I'm trying to help you. You think I want to take something from you?" I apologized, something I regret now, and she let the matter drop, but only on the surface. Underneath, I could feel her frustration growing. She didn't want to learn how the business worked. She wanted it delivered. And each time she realized I wasn't stepping aside quickly enough, her patience thinned. She made offhand comments about old-fashioned methods, questioned my leadership in front of others, and treated the business as if it were already hers, speaking about future plans, renovations, expansions, all without consulting me. At the time, I thought it was youthful arrogance. Now I understand it was groundwork. Every question, every document, every subtle shift in tone. She wasn't preparing to join the business. She was preparing to take it. The days leading up to her attempted sale were strangely busy, too busy. My daughter, who had never voluntarily set foot in the workshop unless she needed something, suddenly appeared every morning with a notebook in hand and a bright, artificial smile stretched across her face. "Just learning the ropes, Dad," she said as she followed me around. But she wasn't learning. She was auditing. She walked through the workshop as if she were conducting an inspection. She asked employees what their job titles were, what their salaries were, who reported to whom, and what equipment was due for replacement. She took pictures of shelves, machinery, files, without asking permission. She even asked my foreman, a man who'd worked with me for 20 years, whether he'd feel comfortable in a more modern leadership structure. He looked at her like she'd spoken a foreign language. At first, I thought she was finally taking an interest. Part of me even felt a flicker of pride. Maybe she had matured. Maybe she wanted to step into the business honestly, not by force. But that hope vanished quickly. She began requesting access to things she had no legitimate reason to touch. Key financial ledgers. Employee files. Supplier contracts. The safe room where we stored older agreements. When I asked why she needed them, she said, "I'm trying to understand everything so I can help you." But the way she said, "help," didn't sound like help at all. Later that week, the staff started whispering. "Sir, your daughter asked if we'd be willing to adjust our schedules for new management. Sir, she asked if I'd stay on if ownership changed. Sir, does this mean you're selling?" Selling? The word jolted something sharp in me. When I approached her about these comments, she brushed me off. "Dad, they misunderstood. I was just asking hypothetical questions." But her hypotheticals were gathering weight. One evening, 2 days before I overheard the negotiation, I found her in my office rifling through drawers. She didn't even look guilty when I walked in. "These should be organized better," she said flatly, holding a stack of contracts that had been in a locked compartment. "How did you get the key?" I asked. She gave me a cool, dismissive smile. "Oh, Dad. You hide things in the same places you always have. You forget I grew up here." I didn't forget. I just never imagined she'd use that familiarity against me. She started staying late after I went home, claiming she had work to finish. Staff told me she would wander into the accounting room, pull files, make private calls from my office phone, and leave with folders tucked under her arm. When my foreman confronted her about removing documents, she told him, "This is going to be my business soon. I need to know what I'm inheriting." Hearing that shook something inside me. But the breaking point came the day before everything collapsed. I came in early, much earlier than usual, and found one crucial file missing. The valuation binder. A detailed, sensitive report used for insurance assessments and potential sale value estimates. The binder was gone. I searched the office quietly, already knowing deep down who had taken it. But I didn't confront her. Not yet. I wanted to see how far she was willing to go. I wanted her intentions to reveal themselves without interference. And reveal they did. Because the next morning, as I walked down the hallway toward my office, I heard her voice, confident, poised, rehearsed, speaking to buyers about selling the company I had spent my entire life building. Everything she had done in the past week suddenly clicked into place. The questions. The documents. The late nights. The missing binder. The entitlement. It had all been preparation. And she genuinely believed I would be too blind, too trusting, or too tired to stop her. She was wrong. I stood there in the hallway, half hidden behind the doorframe, listening to my daughter lay out the future of my business as if I were already gone. Not retired. Not stepping back. Gone. Her voice didn't shake. It didn't hesitate. It carried the confidence of someone who believed she was entitled to every brick, every machine, every sacrifice I had made. "Once the paperwork is finalized," she told the buyers, "I'll take immediate control of operations. My father can stay on in a symbolic role, but realistically, he won't be managing much longer." Symbolic. She reduced me to a decoration. One of the buyers asked whether I was aware of the sale. She didn't even blink. "He trusts me with everything," she said. "Power of attorney is already in place." It wasn't. She had forged it or implied it. Either way, it wasn't real. Hearing her speak with such bold certainty made something inside me shift. It wasn't anger, not yet. It was a cold, heavy understanding. A realization that the little girl who once held my hand while I taught her how to sand a piece of wood had grown into a woman who saw me not as her father, but as an obstacle to her next step. She continued explaining the details with a confidence that came only from preparation. She had studied the numbers, the valuation binder she stole, the contracts, the employee structure. She had prepared her pitch well. Too well. This wasn't a spontaneous betrayal. This was premeditated. My breath felt tight in my chest, but outwardly I stayed still. I didn't walk in. I didn't interrupt. I didn't ask her why she lied about me. I didn't ask how she could stand there and dismantle everything I'd built. I simply stepped back into the shadow of the hallway. It may sound strange, but in that moment, I felt my age more sharply than ever before. Not because I was weak, but because I finally understood what she thought of me. She believed she could erase me with a signature. Replace me with a title. Sell my legacy like an unwanted relic. But here's the truth she didn't know. I was listening not as a helpless old man, but as someone who had already seen enough to make a decision. A final one. I let her finish the meeting. I let her believe she was winning. I let her walk deeper into her own ambition. Because sometimes silence is not surrender. Sometimes it is the beginning of a reckoning. And mine had just begun. After the buyers left that morning, I didn't confront her. I didn't demand an explanation or raise my voice. Instead, I went back into my office, shut the door quietly, and sat at my desk, her stolen valuation binder lying open where she had left it. Pages bent. Notes scribbled in handwriting that wasn't mine. Sections highlighted to justify a quick sale price that would leave me with almost nothing. It was then, staring at those pages, that the pattern finally revealed itself with painful clarity. This wasn't the beginning of her betrayal. It was the culmination. I pulled out old folders, old emails, old logs, things I had ignored before because I trusted her too much to imagine she'd ever cross a real line. But now, as I sifted through them, every moment I had brushed aside came roaring back with new meaning. There was the time she insisted on organizing my outdated financial system, only for me to later find missing invoices tied to our biggest client. She had claimed it was an accident. At the time, I believed her. There was the encrypted spreadsheet she asked me to send her, for safekeeping. I looked at the sent date again. It was the same week she began taking meetings downtown. Meetings she claimed were for a volunteer project. There was the evening she convinced me to sign a routine update to an employee benefits package. I remembered she had hovered close, steering my pen towards certain lines. Back then, I thought she was being affectionate. Now I saw the deception clearly. The document had contained an added clause about temporary managerial authorization under unforeseen conditions. Not legally binding, but suggestive enough for her to use in conversation. I also remembered overheard fragments over the past few months, quick, hushed conversations that stopped when I entered the room. It'll go through soon. He won't fight it. Just be ready when I call. At the time, I assumed she was planning a surprise for my birthday. Now I knew the surprise. As I turned page after page, the truth settled over me in a way I couldn't ignore anymore. She hadn't suddenly decided to take the business. She had been preparing for months, maybe longer. She had studied my routines. My habits. My vulnerabilities. She knew when I woke up, when I left the office, when I took my medication, when I was tired. She knew exactly how to time her actions so I wouldn't notice. She knew which employees were loyal, which ones might be intimidated, which ones wouldn't question her authority. Every step she took was calculated. And the more evidence I found, the heavier the realization became. She didn't see me as a father to love. She saw me as a hurdle to remove. But the most painful part wasn't the betrayal itself. It was seeing how long she had been shaping the pieces for this moment, while I mistook her growing involvement for care. I sat there for a long while, surrounded by the truth she never thought I'd uncover. And when I finally stood up, it wasn't with anger, but with absolute clarity. She wanted to play a game she didn't understand, one involving paperwork, authority, and control. But she forgot something I had learned over 40 years of running a business. The person who truly owns something doesn't need to fight for it. They simply protect it. And that's exactly what I intended to do next. The moment I finished sorting through the evidence of her months-long scheme, the course of action became obvious. Not loud. Not dramatic. Not emotional. Just, necessary. For most of my life, every major decision I made involved discussion. First with my wife, later with trusted employees, occasionally even with my daughter when she was younger and still seemed capable of empathy. But this decision required no counsel, no debate, no hesitation. She had made her move. Now it was my turn. I picked up the phone and called Margaret, my attorney for over 20 years, a woman sharp enough to see straight through excuses, manipulations, and forged intentions. When she answered, I didn't bother with small talk. I need to restructure everything, I said. The business, the ownership, the inheritance. All of it. She didn't ask why. Maybe she heard the steel in my voice. Maybe she sensed this wasn't just legal housekeeping, it was self-preservation. We met the next morning in her office. I brought every file my daughter had touched, every suspicious document she tried to slip past me, and the valuation binder she stole. Margaret examined everything carefully, her expression tightening with each page she turned. "This isn't someone helping you," she said at last. "This is someone preparing to replace you." I nodded. "That's why I need the business protected." And so we began. We drafted new ownership papers. We locked the company into an irrevocable trust with me as the sole controller. We removed any potential loopholes that someone, specifically her, could use to claim authority. We added protective clauses preventing unauthorized sale attempts, forged designations, or emergency managerial takeovers. We restructured my personal will to ensure the business would go only to those who respected its purpose, not those trying to sell it piece by piece. As I signed each document, I felt something settle inside me, not anger, not bitterness, but a kind of clarity I hadn't experienced in years. A settling of the ground beneath my feet. This wasn't revenge. This was correction. My daughter believed she could manipulate signatures and whispers into ownership. What she didn't understand was simple. A business built over decades doesn't fall into someone's hands just because they reached for it. When I left Margaret's office, the weight on my shoulders was gone. My decision was set. My legacy was secure. And the next chapter, the one she had unknowingly walked straight into, was already in motion. In the days that followed the legal restructuring, I carried on as though nothing had changed. I arrived at the workshop at my usual time. I greeted the employees. I reviewed orders. I held meetings. I even made coffee for myself the same way I had for the last 4 decades. But inside, everything had shifted. The business was protected. My assets were secured. My daughter's access, real or imagined, had been severed completely. She just hadn't discovered it yet. And watching her move through the workshop, unaware that the ground beneath her had quietly been pulled away, was like watching someone rehearse for a role that no longer existed. She started showing up more frequently. Every morning, she arrived before most of the staff, heels clicking confidently across the concrete floor. She walked straight into my office, without knocking, and sat in the chair opposite mine, crossing her legs like she belonged there. "Dad, we need to talk about the buyer's offer," she said one morning, tapping her pen impatiently. "They want to close within 2 weeks. We should get ahead of the paperwork." I didn't look up from my ledger. "There won't be a sale." Her smile tightened. "Dad, be reasonable. You can't keep holding on to this place forever. I'm trying to help you transition." Transition. She loved that word. It let her pretend she was doing something kind. "Let's revisit this later," I said, and turned the page. She huffed, stood abruptly, and left, but not before I saw something flicker across her face. Annoyance, yes. But deeper than that, fear. The first cracks were appearing. Over the next few days, her pressure escalated. She cornered employees in the break room, asking if they'd be willing to adapt to new ownership structures. She demanded updated payroll data. She requested signed statements from my managers confirming her future leadership role. And each time they hesitated, she became sharper, colder, more agitated. To them, it seemed like ambition. To me, it was desperation. She knew she was close to securing the sale. She just needed my compliance. Or at least the appearance of it. One afternoon, she barged into my office again, waving a stack of papers. "Sign these," she said. "They're preliminary agreements. Nothing binding." I didn't touch them. No. Her jaw clenched. "Dad, why are you resisting me? You're acting paranoid." I met her gaze evenly. "This business is not for sale." Her voice rose. "It's not just your decision anymore. This affects me too." "No," I said, calm but firm. "It doesn't." The words hit her like a slap. She stepped back, eyes narrowing as she tried to read my expression. For the first time, she looked unsure. And insecurity does strange things to people who believe they're entitled to control. That evening, she returned unannounced. I heard her enter through the side door, rustling drawers in the accounting office, pacing the hallway, slamming doors harder than she meant to. I didn't confront her. I simply observed from the corner of the workshop, concealed behind shelving. She was frantic. Searching for something she believed she had a right to. Ownership papers. Authority documents. Anything she could use to prove to herself that she still held power. But everything she needed was already gone. The next morning, she stormed into my office again. "You changed something," she said, pointing at me like an accuser. "I can feel it. Something's different." I simply closed my notebook. "When the time comes," I replied, "you'll understand." She stared at me, confused but unsettled. And in her eyes, I saw the truth. She knew control was slipping away. She just didn't know how completely she'd already lost it. And she had no idea that the moment she'd been building toward, the sale she believed would secure her future, would be the very event that destroyed the illusion she'd lived in for months. The confrontation was coming. She felt it. I knew it. And by then, the outcome was already decided. The morning of the attempted sale arrived with an unsettling stillness in the air, one of those quiet days where even the birds seemed to hold their breath. I arrived at the workshop earlier than usual, unlocked my office, and sat at my desk with a cup of coffee. I wasn't anxious. I wasn't angry. I wasn't even curious. I simply waited. At exactly 10:07 a.m., I heard the front door swing open and sharp heels clack across the floor. My daughter's voice followed, bright and confident. "They're already in the conference room," she announced, poking her head into my office without waiting for acknowledgement. "Try to look presentable, Dad. First impressions matter." I nodded but didn't rise immediately. She mistook that for compliance and disappeared again. I walked into the conference room 5 minutes later. 2 buyers sat at the table, both neatly dressed, with polished briefcases and expressions that mixed caution with opportunity. My daughter stood at the head of the table like she owned it. "Let's begin," she said, gesturing toward a stack of documents. She had no idea that Margaret, my attorney, was standing just outside the door, waiting for my signal. My daughter launched into her pitch, confident and rehearsed. "As discussed, we're finalizing the sale today. My father agrees it's time to transition leadership." I didn't agree, I said quietly, taking a seat. Annoyance crossed her face, but she kept her composure. "Dad, we talked about this. You don't need to make this difficult." "We never talked," I replied. The buyers exchanged looks. Sensing control slipping, she pushed the stack of contracts across the table. We'll just need your signature here, here, and here. Before I could respond, she added, and everything will be legally binding once completed. That was my cue. I nodded toward the door, and Margaret stepped inside with a folder thicker than the sale documents combined. My daughter's eyes widened when she saw her. "Who is this?" she asked sharply. "My attorney," I said. Margaret sat down calmly. "Gentlemen, before any signatures occur, there are legal matters that must be clarified." My daughter snapped, "There are no issues. I have full authority." "You do not," Margaret interrupted. She opened the folder and laid out the documents. The irrevocable trust placing full ownership solely under my control. Revocation of any previously implied authority. Legal protections preventing unauthorized sale attempts. The updated will. The forensic findings proving she removed documents without permission. Each page landed like a stone. The buyers leaned forward, studying the papers. The more they read, the more their expressions shifted, from confident interest to concern, then outright discomfort. My daughter's voice shook for the first time. "Dad, what did you do?" "What I should have done months ago," I replied. She turned to the buyers, desperation rising. "This is a misunderstanding. He's confused." "I am not confused," I said, my voice cutting through hers. Margaret continued, "To be clear, this business cannot be sold. Not today. Not by her. Not ever without his explicit written consent." The buyers closed their briefcases simultaneously. "We were told you had granted her authority," one of them said carefully. "I didn't." "And she implied you were stepping down," the other added. "I'm not." Silence fell heavy over the room. My daughter's face drained of color as the truth cornered her from all sides. She looked between us, the buyers, Margaret, and me, and realized she had no way out. "This can't be happening," she whispered. But it was. The buyers stood, offered tight, professional apologies, and exited quickly, leaving her alone with the collapse of everything she had schemed for. When the door finally shut behind them, she turned to me with trembling fury. "You ruined everything," she spat. "No," I said softly. "You tried to steal everything. I merely stopped you." Her breathing grew shallow, her bravado melting into panic. "What am I supposed to do now?" "That," I replied, standing and gathering my papers, "is something you should have considered before you planned a future built on taking something you never earned." I walked out of the conference room, leaving her standing there. Speechless, powerless, undone. Everything she thought she controlled had collapsed in her hands. And the sale she believed would secure her future had instead exposed her to herself. In the days after the failed sale, my daughter moved through life like someone who'd been dropped into an unfamiliar world. The confidence she once carried, sharp-edged, unwavering, self-assured, shattered almost instantly. And without it, she looked lost. Smaller. Stripped of the image she built around herself. At first, she tried denial. She came by the workshop the morning after the buyers walked out, pretending nothing had happened. She marched in briskly, clipboard under her arm, and demanded payroll files for review. My foreman gently told her, "Ma'am, you're not authorized to access those." Her face froze. She stared at him as if he'd spoken an impossible sentence. "I'm his daughter," she replied. "That doesn't grant access," he said quietly. Her mouth opened and closed, but she said nothing. She left without another word. Later that afternoon, she tried again. This time approaching employees one by one, asking if they would still support her leadership vision. Most of them avoided eye contact. A few walked away mid-sentence. One told her plainly, "Your father is our boss. Not you." That broke something in her pride. Next came anger. She sent me long texts, paragraphs upon paragraphs, accusing me of betrayal, of humiliation, of destroying her future. She said I had embarrassed her, made her look weak, and ruined her chance at a new beginning. She called me selfish, manipulative, cruel. I read every word, and replied to none. Silence frustrated her more than confrontation ever could. Then the panic began. Her lifestyle had always depended on the assumption that one day she'd have access to the business's resources. She spent money fast, borrowed even faster, and invested in short-lived dreams that never turned into anything. Now, with the illusion gone, the consequences started catching up. Creditors called. Her landlord issued warnings. Her car payment bounced. The friends, who once hovered around her, disappeared the moment she had nothing to offer. She tried visiting me at home one evening. I heard her pacing on my porch before she finally knocked, 3 timid taps instead of her usual confident stride. When I opened the door, she looked tired, disheveled. Her bravado was gone, replaced by a raw, unfiltered fear. "Dad, can we talk?" she asked. There was a tremor in her voice I hadn't heard since she was a child. But instead of apologizing, she tried one last tactic: emotional manipulation. She spoke about being alone, about feeling attacked, about how I overreacted, about how she only wanted to help. She twisted every sentence, searching for a crack in my resolve, a place where she could slip her way back into control. But the truth was simple. She wasn't sorry for what she did. She was sorry she got caught. When I didn't respond to her monologue, her frustration returned. She raised her voice, insisting I fix her problems, insisting I give her another chance. But I didn't bend. Not this time. By the time she left the porch, she realized something she never imagined possible. Her plan had failed. Her influence was gone. Her safety net no longer existed. And the business she tried to sell behind my back was now the very reason she'd have to rebuild herself. Without shortcuts, without entitlement, without me. The final confrontation didn't happen at the workshop. It didn't happen in an office or a conference room. It happened on a quiet Sunday afternoon, in my own living room, where the sun filtered through the curtains just enough to soften the edges of the moment. She arrived without calling. I heard the hesitation in her footsteps before she knocked. When I opened the door, she stood there with red-rimmed eyes, clutching her bag like it was the last thing tethering her to the ground. "Dad, please," she said. "I need to talk to you." I stepped aside and let her in. She sat carefully on the couch, as if afraid it might collapse under her. I took the armchair across from her, waiting. She stared at her hands for a long time, gathering the words she wanted me to hear. But what she finally said wasn't an apology. "I deserve another chance," she began. "I messed up, but you pushed me into a corner. You never let me be part of the business. You never trusted me. I only did what I did because you kept shutting me out." There it was again, deflection, blame, the refusal to take accountability. "I tried to talk to you," she continued, voice tightening. "You ignored me. You treated me like I didn't matter. So yes, I tried to make something happen. I needed stability. I needed a future. And I needed to know that you wouldn't leave me with nothing." I listened without interrupting. She mistook my silence for agreement. "Dad," she said, softer now, "you owe me another chance." I leaned forward slightly. "No. I don't." She flinched. "What you did wasn't a mistake," I said quietly. "It was a choice. A calculated, deliberate choice to take something you didn't earn and justify it by convincing yourself I was the problem." She opened her mouth, but I raised a hand. "You didn't come here to apologize. You came to reclaim access. That's not remorse. That's strategy." Her face hardened, but I continued. You tried to sell the business behind my back. You lied about my health. You forged authority. You hid documents. You manipulated people. And even now, you're asking for forgiveness without giving any. Tears filled her eyes, but I didn't waver. You will always be my daughter, I said. But that doesn't mean you get to own my life's work. Love is not ownership. Family is not entitlement. She swallowed hard. So, that's it? You're just cutting me out. No, I said. You cut yourself out the moment you tried to erase me. Silence hung heavy between us, long enough for her to understand that this wasn't anger speaking. It was clarity. She stood slowly, wiped her eyes, and walked toward the door without another word. When it closed behind her, the house felt still, not empty, not broken. Just quiet in a way that finally made sense. The line had been drawn. And for the first time in years, it stayed where it needed to be. In the weeks following our final confrontation, the house grew quiet again, but this time, the quiet didn't suffocate me. It didn't echo with loss or confusion. It didn't feel like failure hanging in the air. It felt intentional, like a space finally cleared of noise that never belonged there. For the first time in a long while, I could breathe without expecting another ambush, another demand, another attempt at control. I returned to the workshop with a lighter step. The employees greeted me warmly, and I noticed something in their faces: relief. They had felt the tension long before I realized its full depth. They had watched her stride through the building, questioning their roles, measuring their value, treating the business as a prize rather than a community. Her absence restored calm. I took time to reevaluate everything: our operations, our long-term plans, our training programs. Instead of protecting the business from internal sabotage, I could finally focus on growing it again. It felt like exhaling after years of holding my breath. One afternoon, I gathered the entire team. We stood in the workshop where the smell of wood and warm machinery filled the air. I thanked them for their loyalty, for their patience during the months of uncertainty, and I announced a new mentorship initiative in my late wife's honor, an apprenticeship program for young people who wanted to learn skilled trades but lacked resources or opportunity. The idea received a round of applause that filled the room with a warmth I hadn't felt in years. It was the kind of thing my wife would have encouraged. She always believed the best legacy wasn't money or property. It was giving others a chance to build something meaningful. Outside of work, I reconnected with people I had unintentionally neglected: old friends, extended family, those who cared for me without needing anything in return. I visited my brother more often, took long walks around the neighborhood, dusted off books I had bought years ago but never read. Life felt grounded again. And as for my daughter, she stayed distant. Not out of spite this time, but out of necessity. She had to learn lessons I could not teach her, about consequences, about self-reliance, about the difference between inheritance and entitlement. She reached out once or twice, but with short, surface-level messages that carried no genuine accountability. I responded politely but briefly. The door wasn't closed to her forever. But it was no longer open for her to walk through with the expectation of control. One evening, I stood outside the workshop as the sun dipped behind the trees, casting long shadows across the yard. The building glowed softly in the fading light, the same way it had on the day my wife first convinced me to expand it. She had always understood the soul of this place. As I watched the lights flick on inside, I felt her presence, not as a wound, but as a steady reminder of the values she lived by: honesty, work, loyalty, love without possession. My daughter tried to take the business because she saw it as a shortcut to security. But the truth was simple. Security isn't something you steal. It's something you build. And after everything that happened, I knew my foundation, my real foundation, had held firm. I had my work. I had my peace. And I had clarity about the future, one I would shape on my own terms. The legacy I leave won't be signed over in secret deals or forged papers. It will be built, day by day, by those who choose to honor the effort it takes to create something worth keeping. If there's one thing this experience taught me, it's that betrayal doesn't always arrive with rage or confrontation. Sometimes it walks in quietly, smiling, dressed as ambition or concern. Sometimes it comes from the person you least expect, the person you raised, the person you believed would carry your values forward when you no longer could. For years, I assumed love alone could shape character. That family ties could outweigh entitlement. That time and patience could replace responsibility. I believed my daughter would one day understand the difference between a legacy earned and a legacy taken. But I learned that character is a choice, one each person must make for themselves. You can give someone opportunity. You can give them guidance. You can give them love without condition. But you cannot give them integrity. That must come from within. My daughter tried to sell my business because she saw it as property, not purpose. She saw it as a shortcut, not a commitment. She measured its value in money, not meaning. And that misunderstanding, of work, of sacrifice, of legacy, was the root of everything that went wrong. If you take anything from my story, let it be this. A legacy is not something you inherit. It's something you respect. And respect cannot be forced, it must be earned. Sometimes protecting what you've built means drawing lines you never imagined you'd have to draw. Sometimes love requires boundaries. And sometimes the hardest thing a parent can do is step back and let consequences teach what words never could. I didn't choose this ending. But I chose to honor the work that defined my life. And in doing so, I finally learned that peace isn't found in holding on to others. It's found in holding on to yourself. Thank you for listening to my story. Sharing something this personal isn't easy, but if it gave you a moment of clarity, or reminded you of the importance of protecting what truly matters, then it was worth telling. If you enjoy meaningful, emotional stories like this one, I invite you to subscribe to the channel. Your support helps these lessons reach people who may need them at just the right time. Take care of your work, your peace, and your boundaries. And remember, a legacy is built with patience, and guarded with wisdom.